Hello, hello. Welcome back to the Career Corner podcast where we answer your cozy career cues. I'm your host, Malcolm Alexander, and I am super excited to be joined by Samantha Glatzer today. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here. It's my privilege.
It's our privilege to host you and take some time out of your day. To start us off, I would love to hear a little bit about your sort of general personal career journey from your time here at IC to your current role with Your Career Compass.
Sure. So I graduated from Ithaca in 1992. I was a film and photography major. And after college, I moved out to Los Angeles and I worked for a production company. And then from there, I ended up going to Castle Rock. And I worked at Castle Rock for a couple of years. And then I decided that I wanted to come back to New York because this is where I was from the East Coast and there are no seasons in California. So I decided to come back. So I came back and I ended up producing commercials for probably about 5 years. And then through that, and working through with commercials, most of the people and the clients who were part of the commercials were people who worked in advertising agencies. And I was looking for my first career pivot, which was I didn't want to be out on set at 4 o'clock in the morning eating Twizzlers anymore. I wanted to have a real life. So somebody had told me about recruiting, and I thought, oh, I could recruit in advertising and recruit creative specifically because that's the people that I knew. And I went and I recruited for a couple of years. And then I met my former business partner and we started a company called Sam and Lori. And I was a recruiter in advertising, branding, marketing, and design for most of the big agencies in New York and sort of nationally for over 20 years. And Sam and Lori is still in existence. But over the course of my career as a recruiter, the part of what that I did that I always loved the most was helping people figure out what was next. And in order to do that more holistically, I went back to school and I became a certified coach. So now I'm a certified coach through the ICF. I went to school at Brown. And I've formed my company called Your Career Compass. And so what I do now is really a hybrid between coaching, which is really about figuring out who you are and what you want and your strengths and your values and those sorts of things. And then moving those into more of the career strategy, which is when I put on my recruiter hat to help people figure out how to implement the plan once they figure out what it is that they want to do. So that's my story to date, to be continued.
Yes, hopefully for much, much longer.
Yeah.
I love that you mentioned pivoting. We talk a lot on the show, as I'm sure you know all about, the idea that a career path is very nonlinear most of the time, all of the time usually. And so being able to pivot and choosing when to pivot can be really important. I'd love to hear a little bit more about your choice to start your own businesses and what that was like, I guess.
Well, I mean, it depends on when you start when you get the courage to make a jump. I started my company, I was in my late 20s. I didn't have a lot of responsibilities yet. And I am definitely inherently, this is something that would come up in coaching. If somebody was coaching me, I'm a risk taker. And I'm also somebody who believes that, you can make something out of nothing. And I think those qualities sort of gave me permission to take some risks and to do something that I wasn't really sure what the outcome was going to be. And because of that, I think I wasn't as invested in, I didn't have a plan. I didn't really have a map at that time to figure out sort of where I was going to ultimately go. And it just grew. And now I'm doing it again. And, it takes a lot of, takes some confidence, and it also just takes some trust that the process is going to work out. And, if you follow, not to sound cliche, but if you follow what you love and if you follow what you are interested in and where your strengths lie, you oftentimes end up in what you want to be doing. And when you're doing what you want to be doing, oftentimes you're successful. It's the people who stay stuck because they're afraid and there's sometimes very valid reasons for not making a pivot. But for a lot of people, that fear can hold them back from taking some chances.
I love that. Yeah, absolutely. As this show is sort of geared towards young professionals breaking into the career world, I think there's a lot of fear, especially with the idea of, oh, I'm not going to have this first job that I have for the rest of my life. I'm probably going to have to change. And maybe that change will be really bad, or maybe it'll allow me to do something that I've always wanted to do. So I love that you emphasized that, yes, it can be scary, but also if you're pursuing what you want to pursue and are working really hard at it, then you're doing everything right.
Yeah. And I think a lot of what I just sort of share with people when I talk about this is it's not each step is an individual step. So, you have to think about what you ultimately want your long-term goal to be, and you want to sort of have a vision for where you're actually going. Where do I want to be in 5 years? Where do I want to be in 10 years? Where do I want to be in 15 years? If you want to think that far out. And then it's like, what are the steps that you need to put in place in order to achieve that goal? And sometimes when you frame the steps, the earlier steps, they can be a little bit less scary and less intimidating. So what's 1 year out in your first job, as long as it's in service of what you think your ultimate goal is, then you're kind of on the path. And sometimes that first job is not the right one. And that's okay too. It's only when people look back on their resumes and tell their story that it makes logical sense. When you're living it, oftentimes the things that you're doing make no sense. And you have to sort of piece together a story that is, that becomes a story. That's part of the process of sort of creating a brand, as you move through your career.
I love that. Absolutely. To stay sort of on the topic of coaching and branding, I'd love to hear a little bit about if there's any sort of common mistakes that you notice when you work with people who are looking to either pivot to a new role or just break out of college into their industry.
Sure.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. So many things. I think that part of the story, like part of the way that I tend to talk about this is you need to figure out if there is a goal, then you need to think about yourself as a brand. And so if you're creating a brand around the goal, then what are the pieces of your brand that are forward facing? So your LinkedIn, your resume, if you have a portfolio, your portfolio, those are all things that are representative of whatever your goal is. And I think the biggest mistake, or not a mistake, it's just people don't really necessarily know, is if all of those materials are not aligned to whatever it is you think you're looking for, even if it's your very first job, then the person who's opening up your application for a job is confused. And the person who's confused is going to spend zero time trying to analyze and figure out what you can do for that company and how you can make an impact. They're probably just going to swipe past you, and they're looking for the person who is the solution to whatever it is the role is that they are hiring for. So the biggest mistake that I see, and honestly, this is a mistake that happens in sophomore, junior, senior year, and it happens with people that I coach who have 20 years of experience, which is because they're not really clear what they want to do, they tend to cover all of their bases, and they tend to be fairly non-specific about the kinds of things that they might want to do. And they're hoping theoretically that the person who's looking or meeting with them is going to say oh, I know what you should do. You should do this. But that's not how it works. How it works is you have to have put together your materials and your, portfolio, resume, LinkedIn clearly enough so that somebody who is, interviewing you knows exactly what you can do, knows exactly what your strengths are. The other thing that I think people underestimate, when you're in college, you think, oh, I don't have any experience. I don't have any experience doing the thing that I want to do. And the reality is that that's very rarely true. Even if if you want to work in a company that that you're going to be in an administrative role, or you're going to work in an advertising agency and you want to work as an account person or something like that. There are soft skills that are inherently part of that job that you probably have done in your undergraduate career, whether it's a extracurricular or a sport, or you delivered pizzas for Rogan's, and like whatever it is. Is Rogan still around?
Yes.
Whatever it is, if you have to deal with time management skills, and you have to deal with angry customers, and there are things that are inherently happening in your everyday life that if you translate those into the language of the job of the person who is reviewing resumes, they will see something in you that, if you just bullet point and don't express any of the things that you're capable of doing, they just get lost.
I love all of that. I know that I myself am definitely guilty of the sort of vague, well, I'm just going to put all my stuff here and hope that the recruiter likes something and pulls me in.
Yeah, it's actually, it tends to work inverse. A lot of what I talk about, like once I finish working with people for the coaching and the mindset and sort of the confidence and those sorts of things, and we're in the more tactical space, if you think about things in terms of through the lens of a recruiter. So if you were the person who is, you've worked your whole day, you've posted this junior journalism job, and you are sitting down and you're like, all right, I have 100 applications I have to go through. Like, what is my goal? My goal is to have 10, not 100. So what am I going to do? I'm looking to eliminate 90 of them. So how am I going to eliminate the 90? Well, the person who wants to be a writer, journalist, marketing strategist, whatever, I'm like, okay, they don't know what they want to do, which goes back to, have you branded yourself properly? I push them aside because I have a role to fill. I am looking for something very specific, and I've probably outlined all of that in my job description. So I am looking for the person who's going to respond to the need that I have to fill inside my company. So, and everybody else, it's hard, but it's true. it's the hard truth. Those people don't often get interviews, and they don't know why. And that is, you feel like if you're whatever you've been doing in your career so far, your undergraduate career, you feel like you've been doing all the right things. But if you haven't conveyed that in a way that's easy for somebody else to pick up on quickly, then, they're going to spend 10 seconds looking at your resume. They're just going to glance through, and all you really want from a resume is a meeting. Like, you just want to get to the meeting. You want to get to the interview.
Absolutely. That actually really leads me to my next question, which is sort of concerning any changes you've seen in recruiting during your time coaching. I know a lot of students currently are really anxious about the idea of like AI being integrated into recruitment. How do I make my resume stand out with new technologies? I'd love to hear your perspective on any changes that you've witnessed, I guess.
I'm not an AI resume expert, so I will caveat whatever I say now with that. I'm not like a bot person. But, I think that, resume parsing has been around for a long time, way before AI got so nuts in the last couple of years. So, a lot of the applicant tracking systems, they call them ATSs. A lot of those ATSs were searching for keywords, even 10 years ago. So I think, a highly designed resume, as I understand, if it's, if there's too many lines, if there's too many things, if you're a designer and, it can get sort of the reader can't read it, I guess, is sort of what happens. I think you have to make sure that you have keywords in your resume, but they have to be authentic. I think that one of the things that can help a lot, which is an AI cheat, honestly, and I use this a lot with my clients, is take the job description, take the resume, put them in the same chat and ask for what are the hard skills and soft skills that overlap and what's missing. And that can help you rework your resume in service of whatever the role is that you are applying for, so that you have a better chance than you might have had. So I don't know if that entirely answers the question, but
No, absolutely. Thank you so much.
sure.
I think, it's very complicated. We're not looking for any sort of like perfect answer. Sort of the theme that we've been sticking with this season has been, what is AI doing to the career world? So,
yeah, and I've been talking to a lot of people, a lot of professionals about what the impact is of AI on juniors, on people who are entering the market. And I had a call about this yesterday. And, the number one thing that I am hearing is learn the tools so that if you're not using things other than chat, go and play with Gemini, play with Claude, play with everything so that it feels familiar. I think how people are using it, at least from what I'm hearing, is you're using it, especially as a junior, as a partner. So there's certain things that you can do faster because you're using AI. And there's certain things, soft skills and other skills like that AI can't do yet, hopefully never. And so it's important to graduate and feel like you have a handle on it. It's not like, it's like if you want to be a designer, you need to know Adobe and Photoshop and Illustrator and all of those things. If you want to work now in the world, you have to know AI tools.
100%. Yeah, that echoes a lot of what our other guests have said. So, thank you so much for sharing that insight, regardless of whether or not you feel like it was amazing. But I think our listeners will really enjoy it. I'd love to sort of stay on the topic of sort of fears, I guess, and hear your perspective on how to deal with burnout when going through applications and hearing a lot of nothing back.
Yeah.
It can be really disheartening to people. I'd love to hear your advice.
Yeah, it is. It's incredibly disheartening and frustrating, and especially when I think there's a lot of people who are doing comparison. So, my friend got a job, this one's hearing back, it must be me. And, one of the things that is really important is, to recognize that's not actually true. Everybody is different. Everybody's story is different. Everybody's materials are different. And, so the confidence and the impact of confidence on the process, oftentimes there's things that are in the way. One of the things that comes up a lot in coaching is, you may have a huge list of 15 people that you want to reach out to, and you've written your little emails or your little LinkedIn requests or whatever it is you're going to do, and you're sitting on it and you're not doing it. And sometimes the reason is because, reaching out and networking is cringy and people feel like they don't want to do it. But sometimes it's because, deep down underneath it all, you're afraid of being rejected. You're afraid of, trying and failing. And, so sometimes, in a coaching session with somebody, I'll be talking to them about, they have the whole list and nothing's happening. And what's in the way? Why is it not happening? And there's lots of different reasons that can happen. On a more practical side, that's less sort of on the emotional side, sending emails and job applications out as your only source of job search is going to be very demoralizing. Getting a job through a post is, probably equal to getting a lottery ticket and winning. It is really, really, really hard. And the reality of this market especially is it's about networking and it's about relationships. And it's about, building those relationships and starting, honestly, the earlier you start, the better. I know it doesn't seem like something that a sophomore would be wanting to do, but it is, if you start building out those contacts and those relationships, then when you are starting to look for a job, you're not starting from a dead stop. So most, if I don't know how many of the people who you've had on this podcast have shared how they got their first job, but I got my first job because somebody made an introduction for me to somebody else. And I would say that in the last 2 years working with kids who are just coming out of college or looking for internships, that is also how they're getting their internships and full-time jobs as well. It's very rare that they're getting a job because they saw a post and they were the one, out of the however many that applied. So I hope that answers the question a little bit.
Yes, absolutely. We talk about connections all the time on this show. And I think you echoed a lot of points that we hear often, especially from students about, oh, it's kind of cringy. It's embarrassing. I don't want to have to cold email people. I don't want to have to build these connections, but it really is something that you kind of have to get used to doing and can get easier the more you just do it.
Yeah. One of the things that I suggest to people, and maybe this is a helpful reframe, is to look at networking through the lens of curiosity. So if you want to work in journalism and you are curious about what the different departments are and what those different entry-level jobs are, and if you approach it like you're doing a documentary, and if you say, okay, I need to interview, 25 people, 30 people in order to figure out who's going to be in my mini documentary about all the careers that exist in journalism, that is going to potentially reframe for you what the process is like. So what you're not doing is reaching out to somebody and saying, hi, I'm so-and-so and I'm looking for a job. What you're saying is, hi, I'm so-and-so and I'm really curious about your role as an associate producer at this news station or whatever it is. And the outcome from that, the second half of that is that when you get off the call and they've shared all their story with you, you now have a contact at that company. So if you see something posted at that company a month from now, you're like, oh, let me call Bob or Joe or Sally or whoever it was I spoke to and see if they can make an introduction for me or make an internal referral, which is oftentimes how people get pulled from that 100-person application pool.
Absolutely. I love that. I think a lot of students, especially here at IC, like to do their own sort of creative projects, especially within Park. And so, thinking of that not just as a separate thing that you do for fun, but how can I sort of integrate this into my job search in a way that could actually help my job search out? I think that's really great.
And that is 100% how this whole thing works. It's very much about that kind of level of curiosity. And, the more people that you can talk to who do things that you're curious about doing, throughout my career, I can't tell you how many people have come through my doors who were recent graduates and they said, I want to work in a creative field. And I would say, what do you want to do? And they would say, I don't know. Maybe marketing, maybe film, maybe, 4 or 5 other things. And the reality is that was the door to a research project. You need to talk to 10 people work in marketing, 10 people work in the creative department, 10 people work in film companies, and keep going until you start to feel like you are hearing things that you're like, oh, I could see myself there. And the coaching part of it comes from filters into that because what kind of environment do I see myself in? How do I like to work in a collaborative environment? Do I like to work by myself? A designer who's sitting behind a computer wearing headphones all day is probably a different personality than somebody who's going to be sort of in like the war room of the New York Times. So knowing some stuff about who you are and how you show up and matching that with the kinds of careers and environments that you're going to be successful in is incredibly important. And the earlier you can do it, the better, because a lot of people end up going down a path that they might like the work, but it's not aligned with who they are inherently. And, then they sort of have to regroup and start all over again.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you've already covered a lot of fantastic advice that I know has been it's helpful to me to hear. I'm sure our listeners will take a lot away from it. But I'd love to close this out if you have any other sort of closing remarks or advice to give sort of you current young professionals looking to break into creative industries. If you've got
I think, wow. I think find the thing that lights you up the most and follow that path. Like if you can find the thing that you can't stop doing, then you have started on the right journey. And I'll give you an anecdotal piece of advice. A couple of years ago, I was talking to an executive creative director who worked at Meta, and he was doing the interviewing for the internships. And he said to me, one of the questions I always ask is, what do you do with your free time? And the reason why he asked that is because the people who are passionate about the thing that they do it all the time. So writers write, photographers photograph, art directors art direct or draw or whatever it is, painters paint, filmmakers make film. And if you have aligned yourself with the thing that you ultimately just inherently love and you can't get enough of, you are 10 times further along than a lot of other people who are just sort of floundering around. So keep doing the thing that you love. That's my advice.
That's great. I love that. Well, thank you so much, Samantha, for joining me
So
today.
welcome.
I think this was
It was
really
really a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it was a pleasure to have you. This was a great conversation. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in to another episode of the Career Corner podcast. We will see you again very, very soon.
Bye. Thank you.